Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Ritz. I am the Director of Product Marketing at VisibleThread. Thank you so much for joining us for our session, VT Writer, Proposal Preparation, Achieving Quality. First, let me thank everybody who has participated in sessions thus far. I know we've had some great questions and some great feedback, so really excited to get started today, and thank you for joining, and make sure to visit the console to download our proposal guide and additional information. And then, of course, we'll be following up with anything you need. The Q&A box is open. Would love for this to be an interactive session. We've left time for questions at the end. And be happy to answer as many of those as possible. If there are ones that we don't get to, we'll make sure to follow up after. So today's session, we really want to focus on VT Writer. So we are going to talk about, VT Writer specifically and what it can do and how it can tackle some of the issues of content creation and quality. But focusing on, beyond content creation, how do we ensure quality and how do we make sure that we are spreading that across the organization? So continuity between teams, making sure that we're staying true to organizational goals and staying true to the goals of our capture process and our proposal plan. So want to jump in here. So we're going to talk about content creation with Visi. So content creation with VT Writer, how we can leverage generative AI to help us create first drafts, and then editing. So getting into editing and iteration. So that conversation, that back and forth, and then ensuring quality. So ultimately, we're going to create content and generate content. Everyone knows that, that can be subject to hallucinations. Everybody knows that that needs a little bit of tweaking, certainly when we're looking at something as impactful as parts of a proposal. So how does VisibleThread help with that to focus on quality, clarity, adhering to your standards, and giving folks across the organization visibility into exactly how things are looking from a quality perspective. I'm going to do a quick demo. So we're going to jump into the platform live at the end. So I'll talk through and look at some slides and some screenshots of the way that the platform works. And then at the end, we will jump into the platform in action and give you a look at exactly how that functions in real time. As always, if you have additional questions or there are things afterwards that you would like to see more of, we're happy to connect and happy to elaborate on anything that you would like to see or would like to learn more about. And of course, Q&A. So please ask questions. I'm excited to hear your feedback. So let me jump in here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is content creation. How do we create content? How do we leverage the LLM to create content and help us get off that blank page? We'll talk quickly about best practices and then show you a few examples. So best practices for prompting in general. We want to make sure that we're being clear and giving specific instructions. So ultimately, the goal with leveraging an LLM or leveraging generative AI to help us create content is to, get off that blank page and get a head start. Also, to give us perhaps idea generation or come at something from a different perspective. Now, in order to make sure the content that we are creating is of the highest quality, there are some things that we can do to create a better baseline. So making sure that we are communicating with the LLM effectively and drilling down into the information that we want to find. So it's easy to get answers that are irrelevant or off topic if you don't give clear instructions. So be specific and communicate only what is essential for the task at hand. And without context, are the directions that you're giving easy to follow? So where are there ideas for potential confusion, and is there context that you can provide to close that gap? So look at your prompts in an analytical way and sort of ask yourself those questions. So the content is the key. So do you have specific needs for formatting or length? Add that. Instead of asking for, a summary, ask to create a summary with title, intro paragraph, and 3 subheadings. If you have specific needs around word count or structure, make sure that you supply those details. really focusing in on tone and style. So is there a specific tone preferred by an organization, specific tone that's preferred by the customer? Is there specific language that needs to be considered? Again, all of that can be part of the instruction in your prompt. So consider the audience. Is this a white paper? Is this a proposal that's going to be evaluated? Is this private or public sector? Who is the awarding agency? All of those things can be considered when you are prompting the LLM. You want to look at the LLM as it is, an assistant, a writing assistant, and you need to give the most clear instructions as possible to ensure the best result. So thinking about, again, who is reading the proposal, who's our audience, and what do they want to see. When we're talking about prompting, a good prompt really does three things. So it contains a task to perform or answer a question, frames the content of the request, and gives relevant detail or constraints that the AI needs to consider to create the most relevant output. So using that as a baseline, you can factor in all of the other best practices, but if your prompt has these three things, you are in a good kind of jumping off point. So I'm going to show you a quick example of how you can enhance a prompt. I'm just walking through this as sort of a baseline, and then as we continue through, we'll talk about how we're going to create the content, edit and iterate the content, and score the content. So an example of super general, create an audit report on the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. I guess I could have been even more general and said, create an audit report for a power station. So this gives us instruction and location, but we can add additional framing and context to get us to a better starting point. So if I say, create an audit report of the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and the recipient is the Department of Energy. So I've added relevant detail. So I've added the requesting agency. So this way we can factor in the preferences and continue to enhance. So the LLM containing the endless amount of knowledge and millions of documents that it's referencing will understand or can potentially understand that the Department of Energy operates in X way, and so they can frame that in that way or frame it more appropriately. So continuing to iterate on that, I can add my focus. So the report is going to focus on safety, quality, downtime, and environmental risk mitigation. So beyond, I would like an audit report. I would like an audit report on these specific things. So again, if you're thinking about this as a human assistant, if you want a specific outcome, you're going to ask and give specific instructions. The same way if you are working with an LLM. Again, last piece, what do I want the output to look like? So the response must have headings for each focus and be less than 2,500 words. So we started with our initial create an audit report on the safety of the Beaver Valley Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and have ended with that piece, but we've added an audience and context, we've added a focus, as well as framing and structure for our response. So ultimately, this is going to give us a much better starting point to iterate from. So just an example of structure of prompt as well as content that you would like to add. So how can we make that even more relevant? So use files is where we come in with that. So looking at the ability to upload local files from your environment, connect to SharePoint, or reference collections of files that you've used previously as you're working through the system. So the more that you use it, the more collections that are contained, the easier that process becomes. So ultimately what we're looking to do is ground our first draft content in data. So we want to reference key documents, and then we want to make sure that we can map the text that we're creating to that information in order to verify. So the big thing with generative AI is trust but verify, and using use files and grounding that in data really helps us to do that effectively. This will also help us to reference and map key content. So in this example, so the screenshot that you're looking at is that prompt generated. and it's showing me exactly where the sources are and where the information is coming from. So I have my referencing information, and then I have my source documents. So ultimately, in every section of my report, I can see where this was pulled from, therefore giving me a much, much better idea of how valid and accurate it may be. So if they've pulled from the emergency response plan, I can reference the emergency response plan for any context and make sure there isn't anything missing or there isn't anything that I need to add. So beyond the individual contributor, so we're talking a little bit about through all of those steps, it would be the writer or the person that's creating content. So how can this help the team? How can this help organizationally? And how can you build upon some of these things and not have it be such a manual process every time? So I already mentioned the collection. So when you're using files or using SharePoint information, files from your environment to reference to create documents, you can create collections. You'll see a bit later on when I jump into the platform, when I jump in to use a collection, you'll see a multitude of them there. So if there are specific things, source documentation of yours, legal documentation, documents you want to refer to for structure, those types of things, you can reference those every time. A good example is if you wanted to create an action plan or a policy or procedure plan, and you have a folder of documents that are the appropriate structure. So these are the appropriate structure and layout of the document that I'm asking you to create for XYZ topic. That's something that you could have in a collection and reference every time. So it's just one less step as you're moving forward to create new documentation. Additionally, within VT Writer, we have a very unique feature called our generative AI prompt library. So the prompt library gives a foundation to all users of the platform. Ultimately, it's an area where we can create prompt shortcuts. So you have a list of prompt shortcuts to choose from. You can choose prompt type, and then you have a prompt there. They can be as simple or as complex as possible and contain dynamic fields. This allows us to create prompts, but then reuse them. So in a couple different things, if we're using things quite frequently, so you may have a prompt to summarize, you may have a prompt to expand, or a prompt to address word count that you're using quite frequently. Instead of every time that you go in, having to go in, highlight, and ask, or through the chat interface, ask to summarize or ask to expand, you can use the prompt library. You can click on your prompt shortcut and apply that automatically. So workflow shortcuts there. Additionally, some of these prompts, particularly the more complicated ones, have dynamic fields. So you may have a quite complex prompt that is asking for a specific type of documentation, calling out different technical areas, calling out structural pieces, but that may be something you need to do for multiple proposals. So being able to see that prompt in its entirety and then change out some of those highlighted sections allows you to really hone in on things that are working well and then continue to reuse them. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel and do that same thing every time. And it's giving you kind of a baseline of quality. This is really great for folks that are new to Gen AI content generation. So within any team, you are going to have people who really lean into this, who know a ton about prompting and can really leverage it. And then you have people that are new. There shouldn't be such a delta in the outcomes or the content that's produced between those two folks. So this allows us to create prompts and create a library that people can work from. So it is a much softer landing or a shorter or less steep, learning curve for people that are new to the process. And it's just a great collaborative tool and a way for folks to share things that are working really well for their teams. So the next step is editing and iterating. So we created our content and now we want to edit. How can we leverage Visi? How can we leverage generative AI to begin to edit and get closer to a final product? So ultimately, we have to expect to iterate. This is really important, that a lot of the struggle that I see with folks that are really getting into leveraging LLMs and Gen AI in their workflows is expectations versus reality sort of situation. That the idea that AI can kind of do anything, that I can ask an LLM or ask the chat to come up with a response to an RFP and include these 3 things, and then it can spit out a perfect proposal. And that's just not really the case. And if you come in with those expectations, you're often going to be disappointed in the outcomes. So ultimately, we want to expect to iterate when creating content. We can go a pretty far way with really well-structured prompts and referencing files and referencing our information to ground that in data, but we're still going to have some work to do. So we're still going to need to iterate on the content that's been created and work collaboratively with the LLM. So look at it more as a process rather than, I say kind of a starting point rather than an ending point. Again, I'm right ahead of myself. So it's the starting point, and just expect to work with the content. You want to leverage the chat interface to make changes and explore new ideas. I think that everybody talks about content generation, and that's the end goal, is to create content, but there's so many interesting things that can be done with generative AI when we talk about idea generation. So giving prompts to the AI, seeing what comes back, you may get a piece of framing, or you may get some information that you might not have considered in that particular way. So a really great way to explore ideas and to potentially expand, your goals and different things within a proposal or a piece of content. And then we just want to continue to enrich that content. So ultimately, in my example, I asked for headings and subheadings on those specific areas. What I may see, and what I did see in the one that I showed as an iteration, was it gave me some high-level content that I really needed to dig down into. So I want to expand on that. I'll show you an example of that later on when we jump into the platform, of how easy it is to expand on specific ideas or specific topics within. So looking at edit and iterate. So expanding, addressing tone, addressing length, word count, structure, making omissions. So say there are specific things that are being called out that you want to remove, we can address things like that. So these, again, really, really great use case for the prompt library, because these are things that we're going to be doing quite frequently. With all the content we're creating, there may be some type of iteration or some type of editing involved. So really great way to cut out a little bit of time in that workflow and leverage our prompt library. Excuse me. So looking at content iteration, you see here exactly what I said. I had run that prompt, so run the prompt that we talked about on the front end, and then I had the example in our content creation piece, but then I want to expand. So I have this section for downtime. They gave me a couple bullets on unplanned outages, a couple bullets on planned outages. So I'm asking, please expand on downtime. Here's some information that I want you to include on unplanned and planned outages. Include information on the root cause analysis. The root cause analysis that was conducted for the unplanned outage. So I know that we had outages. I need more context on that if this is an audit report. I need to know what we're planned, what we're not planned, and where we're going from there. Now you can see what you get when this comes back and see if there's anything we need to expand upon. Because the great thing is that the source documentation that we have contains all of that. We are using our source documentation, which are some of our logs and reports and all of our functionality pieces. So we're using that source documentation. We know the information is there, instead of having to read through or control find through, pull that information out, and then create content from it. The system is pulling from that to create this content for us. So it's a little bit of both, a little bit of an information finder and research piece, as well as the content generation piece. So I can work collaboratively. So I say we bring up downtime. I need to know more information on that. I know it's in there, so I can prompt the system to get it. This is a good example of that kind of collaborative, I say more conversational way to create content. So managing that via the prompt library. I have an example here of some of our utility prompts. So talking about, rephrasing and simplifying, proofreading, making selections into a list. So this shows you as well the setup of the prompt library. It's really easy to use. You expand, drop and expand, can determine what type of prompt, have a shortcut that's going to show in your list, and then the full prompt. In the screenshot that I had a few slides back, you saw there were some incredibly long prompts, some different things, a lot of different factors involved with them, or a lot of different dynamic features. So again, for all types of prompts, this is appropriate. And when you see these highlighted areas, that's something that we are indicating may need to be changed out. But utility prompts are a great way to leverage this library, and a great way to reuse things. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about is really something that's pretty unique to VisibleThread. We've talked about, creating content, the foundation of what we need to do to create content, how to have a conversation with the LLM to iterate and get ourselves to a much more, I would say, secure starting point, or a much more mature first draft. Now I want to talk about scoring and review. In the description of this section, we talked about quality, clarity, consistency, and how that can be ensured across the organization when we're talking about content. So looking at how VisibleThread attacks those things, we'll dig a bit deeper. So beyond content creation, we want to really look at readability. So how readable is the content that we've created? What are we looking at from a complexity perspective? How accessible is what we're writing, and how clear is our message? VisibleThread provides data-driven results from a scoring perspective, so you can really look at things objectively. So monitoring the use of passive voice, being able to adjust tone and adjust for the type of content that we're creating and or our audience. Analyzing complexity. So along with readability, we're looking at how accessible is this content and what can we do to make this easier for whether it is potential customers, evaluators, public facing, whatever we're looking to do with our information. And we have visibility into a paragraph by paragraph view of grade level and clarity. So again, not only are we doing aggregate scoring, we can look paragraph by paragraph at what we're doing and how that aligns. This is incredibly helpful if you're talking about a proposal, because you're talking about more than likely, and not just proposals, if we're talking about different types of educational documents, different types of organizational documents. So many times these are multi-contributor responses, and you may have people with different specialties that are experts at different types of subject matter, and who are in different departments, different business units, and so maybe a different approach. One of the big things that is a challenge for a lot of our customers when they're talking about the responses is making sure that they maintain single tone of voice and it doesn't look like a book written by 10 different authors. So being able to see paragraph by paragraph, section by section, ultimately helps you to identify areas where you have misalignment and address those more effectively. So achieving consistency across the organization, we want to leverage our watchword lists. I'll show an example here of a watchword, but watchword lists help us to apply company and industry style guides. So help us to really see the language right up and highlight, these are the things that we are saying. So this is our copy, this is what we've created, and these are the terms that we need to use. So to flag terms that we need to replace and make sure that we address those. Also really helpful because when you're creating generative content, even when we are referencing our document, there are, that's a collaborative effort between your documents as reference information and the LLM. Everybody knows that LLMs can hallucinate and sort of do their own thing from time to time. So we need to make sure that the content that we're creating adheres to our style guides and to our language. And this allows us to do that. So it really gives us a safety net. Again, we want to focus as well on customer language. So it's really important, particularly when we are making an offering to a customer, that we are being customer centric, that we are focusing on their language and making sure that we aren't just, talking about what we're good at. We're talking about why our product or our offering is the best fit for their problem or what they're trying to solve for. So monitoring for contractual risk. Ultimately, all organizations have some kind of, style guide or guide generally on the type of language that can be used. Everybody knows, what the risky contract language that's out there and things that we want to include or definitely don't include. So it helps us to monitor for those things as well. Another sort of safety net beyond your contractual reviews. And then we can easily apply that approved language, so easily make those changes with one click. Again, in the example, you'll see what that looks like. But by automatically applying those style guides, we can easily decide to make a change. Now, that is the interesting piece. It's not automatically making those changes for you. You, as the writer, have the onus of whether or not the change is applied. There may be situations where something pops up and you say, no, in this context, it is appropriate there, so I'm not going to take this suggestion. So ultimately, we want to make sure that VisibleThread is assisting you, because AI in general shouldn't replace the human element when it comes to writing, but we can help to make sure that we aren't missing anything and help to make suggestions and give you some parameters when it comes to adhering to specific types of standards. So customizable, and this is a look at a watchword list. You see categories, so things can be categorized. Very similar, if you've ever seen our search dictionaries in VT Docs, we took a look at a screenshot of the AI prompt library, and you saw this same workflow, same thing in the watchword list. So there are not a ton of different things to learn, not a big learning curve there. Everything functions really easily and very similarly. So you have your categories for your watchwords, and then you have words, what you'd like the change to be, and a description. So in that description, it can be the why, it can be a position, it can be, there may be specific context needed for something that's situational, but ultimately you can have multiple options to change to, or different options depending on situations. There's a lot of things that we can do here to give your writers the information that they need. So this really helps even when you're dealing with multiple contributors or multiple folks on a team, people that are SMEs, people in different departments. Anybody who is using VT Writer will have access to these, and then you can make sure that everybody's on the same page. Great from a customer language perspective as well as an internal language perspective. There can be options for multiple languages, and again, you can add context here and description so writers can make an informed decision on the change. Again, we also have the ability to work directly in Microsoft Word. Now, VisibleThread can be accessed in a couple different ways. You do have the browser-based platform, but with Writer, we know that so much of the work that you're doing takes place directly in Word. So instead of needing to upload documents or copy and paste things and work on them in the browser, we have the VT Writer add-in. You can work directly in Word as you're creating content and apply those changes. So it makes it a much easier flow and much more collaborative. And then talking about analyzing the quality of content. So beyond the initial assessment or initial kind of view of our scoring. So every person that is working in VT Writer can see their scores on the content they're creating. So every document that you work in is going to have your readability scores, complexity, grade level, passive voice scores listed at the top, and then highlight, watchwords, highlight grammatical issues, all of those things that you can work down through. But how is this helpful? And that was something we talked about the top. So how can we help this to be more collaborative and help visibility and give better visibility as far as the organization is concerned? So in this instance, this allows us to take a look, a bird's eye view into the usage of VisibleThread and what that data indicates. So quality of writing across an organization can be very subjective and can be viewed or judged in a lot of different ways. It can be from internal feedback, it can be external feedback in a proposal perspective, it can be general quality reviews, gap analysis, a lot of different ways that you could assess quality, and depending on who, it can be very subjective. So here we're looking to put data into that and add these objective measures. So we can track usage and adoption. So looking at the entire group or the entire organization as a whole, looking at specific teams or specific functions, we can assess scoring trends at the user level, team and organizational level. So what are we seeing from a trending perspective, particularly as it relates to watchwords, complexity? Is there a specific type of content that we are struggling with or particularly doing really well? So certain types of content we are executing on really effectively. Others, we have some complexity issues or we're getting feedback from a communication perspective. So what can we do to drill down into that specific type of content? So giving you visibility onto where some of your blind spots may be. You can monitor trends with watchwords. So if you're setting up watchword lists and this is language that we don't want to use or language that we're frequently needing to replace, why is that? Is that in a contractual capacity? Is that in a technical capacity? Is that in kind of a customer-centric capacity? Where are we having the biggest issues with that language showing up? And is there anything we can do to address that? So looking at things from an organizational quality perspective. So seeing trends over time and then assessing the why. So if we're seeing, an improvement in quality and a decrease in the things that we don't want to see, that's great. If not, if that number is fluctuating, why is that? Is it the type of content? Is it different focus, different projects? So it's a really great way to identify those areas and work that in if you're planning a proposal or planning some type of content creation to what you can do from there. And then supporting initiatives. I know there are a lot of folks and a lot of organizations out there that have initiatives around clarity and communication. This helps to support that with real world data. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we will jump in to Microsoft Word and use VisibleThread in action. I'm going to run a prompt and create a short document. We will do an iteration and then look at the scoring. And then we will have some time at the end if there are any questions or anybody has any feedback or anything that they'd like to share. All right, let me share my screen. All right. So what you're looking at here, I'm sure you're very familiar with. This is just a blank document in Microsoft Word. I am going to go to my ribbon at the top and open up VT Writer. When I open VT Writer, you see that I am in creator mode. So in creator mode, I have my blank page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a prompt to create a document. So in this example, essentially what I'm doing is I'm going to use a VisibleThread example. I want to create a summary, and I'm going to show you the prompt that I'm using. Now, this is a good example of how the prompt shortcuts work and how we can apply these. So I have this VisibleThread IT summary prompt that I created, but then you have several different pieces. So create an outline based on a solicitation, create draft responses, create a summary, expanding and pressing draft past performance volumes. There are several things that we can do here. We have our utility prompts, rephrase and simplify, proofread. We have some folks from our marketing teams, a lot of different things that we can see there. So ultimately, we want to use one of these prompts. So I'm using this IT summary prompt that I created. So when you look at the prompt, you see create an overview of what is needed to configure VT Writer to leverage an LLM for generative AI. Please create a section for SharePoint integration, VT RAG, and how to deploy. Create a heading and subheading for each category and summarize the key takeaways. So I've given context. So we create an overview of what I'd like Visi to do. Create a section. So I would like specific sections for these three spots. And then I want headings and subheadings for each category. And I want a summarization of the key takeaways. Now, I could get more specific here. I could add more context, but I don't want us to end up with some crazy long document to generate. So we'll start here and then show how we can use a prompt to make some changes. Now, again, looking at this, I'm asking for specific information. So I'm asking for an overview on specific things, configuring VT Writer, talking about the SharePoint integration, talking about VT RAG. Now, I could just hit go and see what I get, but this is going to be much more relevant if I use some of my files to support what I'm seeing. So again, like I said, you have a few options. So I can select my environment, so I can upload straight from my computer. I can select this little SharePoint icon, and in the SharePoint icon, that will allow me to, excuse me, that will allow me to access any SharePoint environment that I have permissions for. So if I have permissions, I can access it there and then upload it. And then these are my collections. So as I mentioned previously, the more you work in the system, the more robust these collections will become. So I have several things. I didn't change the names of some of them, but you can, they'll come up as the date and time if you don't change the names, but you can name them and use different things. I have documents that I use to reference for maps. I have some of our IT documents. And as you would go down, you'd see I have some different contractual documents and other pieces like that. So that will allow you, like I said, if you have a section of documents for an opportunity, something that you're looking at from a structural perspective, you can continue to reference those. And then the more that you use those things, you don't have to go back in and reinvent the wheel every time. You can just reference what you have previously used. So I have a collection of documents here that is a configuration document, some of our FAQs, RAG, and some of our SharePoint information. So some of our technical documentation. So I'm going to continue. And then you see my prompt. So you see my prompt, create an overview of what's needed to configure VT Writer to leverage LLM for generative AI, create sections for SharePoint RAG, create heading, subheading, category, and summarize key takeaways based on this collection. So that means that the system is factoring in those documents as reference information. So I'm going to go ahead and, send it. I'm happy with this, and we will get started. Okay. So I have a couple options. I'm going to go ahead and insert this. And look at the content. So we have our first draft content here. Now we can begin to make some changes based on what we're seeing. So I'm looking at the document, doing a quick read through. And I would like an expansion here. So I'm going to select this section. I made a selection and I want to expand. So this makes it easy to focus in on one piece and expand on it. So I just want to expand on the process of VT configuration. Needs. So again, you have carte blanche here to do whatever you would like, but I am just going to say expand on this piece and then send that. So now the system is opening a bit more, giving me some more information. Now, I know in these documents, they contain code, they contain very specific instructions and additional, additional information that is needed from a configuration and setup perspective. So I can continue to dig down into this if there's more information that I need. But this gives me a good idea of, okay, you gave me a high level, I want you to expand on this. And then we got into database details, service URL, some more specific, and I got my sources. So it's showing me which document it pulled this information from and exactly what that looks like. So for the sake of argument, say I'm happy with this and I want to take a look at the quality of the content that's been created and maybe some things that I need to address. So there, I'm going to leave creator mode and flip to scoring mode. So as soon as I flip the scoring mode, VT Writer is going to do an analysis of this document. So analyzing long sentences, passive voice, readability, and grade level. Now, I'm not incredibly surprised due to the fact that this is technical documentation, that the grade level is a bit higher than we'd like it to be, and our readability is a little bit lower. We can address that in some senses. Some things we may not be able to. As you know, when you're dealing with technical documentation, some words can't be replaced. There's not a plain language replacement for retrieval augmented generation. So that's something to consider with the different type of documentation and really address structure and what you can change. So again, with watchwords and then ignore terms. So right here in our mode, we can see what we're looking at from a scoring perspective. Now I can start to take a look at some of these areas. I have a lot of long words. I do have a watchword here. So watchword is parameters. It's from my plain language watchword list, and it says it wants to change to limits. Now, in this situation, you may decide or not decide to do that based on what the appropriate technical documentation is, but just for the sake of argument, say that I wanted to do that. This shows you the functionality of watchwords. And then if I say, yes, click to replace, I can click to replace and it'll automatically replace it within the document. Additionally, if there are different things that we want to see, we can jump down to a specific call out. So specific call out or specific paragraph or section. Again, you see paragraph by paragraph assessment that makes it really easy to dig into where we're seeing specific issues. You see our Visi icon here. Now, if we are dealing with, we have a section where the grade level is high because we have very long sentences. The grade level is high because some of the language that we use, we can click to rephrase with Visi and we can have a few options. So this one, there's not a lot that we can do there, but it will show you a couple options. So anything that I want to rephrase or simplify will pop up. It will give me a grade level and I say, okay, no, that's not bad. I want to replace this. I can replace it. So we can address some of these things like long sentences. We can address passive voice. We can address use of specific type of languages really easily. So it's not only in the front end creation piece where we can leverage Vizier, leverage generative AI. We can leverage generative AI here in our writing and scoring as well, just looking at that from a different lens. So when you make some changes, you then reanalyze. This doesn't happen automatically, and that's by design. So we want to make sure that you're getting the analysis when it works into your workflow, and that's something that you want to see when you're ready to reanalyze and get more scoring. So you see these arrows. We have changes. My grade level has gone down. My readability has gone up. So you'll see that trend over time. And within your interface on the platform, on the browser version, every writer can see all of their versions of a document, how they've changed, what's improved, and what they're seeing over time. That, again, feeds into the VT Insight system. So across the board, you can see changes, improvements, and what things are looking like overall from the editing process. So that's a good overview of, a real quick and simplified workflow of creating content, creating a document, iterating, and then coming in, looking at scoring, and making sure that we're adhering to quality standards. Now, all of these standards, when it comes to long sentences, passive voice, readability, grade level, long sentences, all of those things, those are completely customizable for every organization, every environment. We're not making the determination on, how much passive voice is too much or what sentence is too long. That is up to you and your organization, again, because depending on your audience, those things may be different. We're just here to give parameters, provide the data, and set, apply the technology to your rules. So help to set those parameters and help for all of your writers and all of your contributors to be on the same page and write to the same standards. So I will stop sharing and jump back in here. Do we have any, sorry, jumped from that. So questions, any questions, any feedback? I have a couple here that I will answer. Question about deployment options. So deployment options for VT Writer are on-prem and cloud versions. So you can access this on our browser-based cloud, as well as the on-premise version. So the on-premise version is just excuse me, the on-prem version is installed in your environment, so following your security rules, and can function in environments from, kind of general public environments all the way up to completely secure. So we have no visibility into that when it is deployed on premise. We have no link back to that. So the platform is not doing any type of keystroking. We're not getting any data reports or anything like that. So it does meet quality standards for secure environments. And that includes the, the use of the LLM. The platform is also LLM agnostic. So that just means that it can connect with any LLM. It does not have, we don't have, a proprietary system or anything that you have to use. If you have, a trained GPT model, if you have an internal LLM, if you have a secure LLM, something that you're using, it can be connected to VT Writer, and you can leverage that in different ways. You could also leverage, different LLMs if that's something that you wanted to do. Okay, so I have a question about the output of the document. So yes, you can export in a couple different ways. So if you are using the Word add-in. You can use the Word add-in and just work within Word. Within the browser platform, you can also export annotated documents if you're working collaboratively. And then there's a couple different ways that you can export that information into Word to make changes, or export into annotated documents if you kind of want to layer those suggestions in. So question about access. All of the users, because we're looking at this from an organizational quality perspective, all users will see, the watchword list. So watchword lists and ignore lists to make sure that everybody is following those same language parameters. But you can't see other people's documents. So every user has their own space in that sense, that you can see the documents that you have uploaded and you have created and modified. You'll see your sort of timeline. So every different version of a document, everything you've uploaded, all the content that you've generated is there on your timeline or your sort of workflow history. So you can call back to things that you've done. You can access those things, but only your own. You can't see somebody else's timeline or something that they're working on. So that's from a security perspective, and also just a workflow perspective. So unlike VT Docs, where if you're in a similar workspace or shared environment with somebody in VT Docs, and you can access the same documents, there's not the same thing in VT Writer. So in VT Writer, you within the platform, within the browser version, you can only see your workflow. Now, VT Writer obviously can be used in collaborative Word documents. So if there's a collaborative Word document that multiple people have access to, which is often the case in proposal situations, you certainly can use VT Writer as an add-in and that type of thing. But you couldn't log in and see somebody else's scores on that document or the things that they were doing. Okay, one more question. Yes, so thinking about the prompt library. So the prompt library, yes, is completely customizable, and yes, is shareable with your entire team. So whereas I said it's very similar in behavior to the watchwords. So just like everybody can see watchwords, everybody can see the prompt library. So in the prompt library, it's a really great space to set quality standards. So set a baseline of quality for definitely prompts that you're going to reuse or different things that you want to see. And even if there's not a prompt in the prompt library that is exactly what you need, so it's not exactly what you need, you can make adjustments. So when you hit, select that prompt, it populates the chat box or populates the box, but it doesn't send the prompt. You have to take that extra step. So you can make changes, obviously, if you're going to change the dynamic fields, but if there's context that you want to add. So again, even if you're not using them exactly as designed, it's a great framework, and you can add context to that or elaborate on something. And then I say a great way to kind of look at a cheat sheet. If there's something that you want to do that you're not quite sure, it isn't as addressed in the prompt library, it's a great way to look at structure, because the prompt library is going to contain prompts that perform effectively and are structured well and are creating good content. So it's a great way to look at structure and what should be included. So really great learning tool, great collaborating tool, and good way for everybody to contribute. And then again, excellent for folks that are newer to the process. Okay. Well, that's all the questions. Let me thank everybody for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about VT Writer and how we can help and what the platform can do. There's all kinds of resources that will be coming in the coming weeks. And we look forward to speaking with everyone. Certainly, if you have any questions, follow-up questions, you can reach out directly, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn, but reach out to us And we look forward to talking to everybody and then continuing to deliver this type of content. If you are interested in generative AI and prompting, we have a couple articles that I've written on, prompt types and real world applications on our website. We also have later in the month, we have some webinars coming up on those topics as well. So really diving into prompt engineering, best practices, and giving some good examples for proposal professionals. So if you're staying for the next session, you can stay here and that will roll right over. So next will be Pitch Perfect, Proposal Prep, and the Art of the Oral Presentation. So really excited about that. Like I said, you'll roll right into that if you'd like to, so everybody can take a little bit of a break and then jump in with Meredith in 5 minutes or so. But again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for Thank you for participating in Optimize, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.